I just want to welcome everybody to our webinar. This is Frank DeSocio. We have a lot of content. We're always available at the end for questions or deeper. You can send me an email or Tom. I'll let him handle that. I also want to thank a couple, three people, and then I'll be quiet. I want to thank Roger Nyquist, chairman of our Government Affairs Committee, and everything he's done and been through and fought through. I want to thank Tom and Sarah for everything they're doing. This has not been easy. Could we have got a few more nuggets for proprietors maybe? Yeah, but we did pretty damn good. And then I'll leave it with this. Be sure you spend some time on this. I'm getting the name wrong, but this payroll credit on your payroll stuff. And I'll let Tom will talk about it, but it's something that you get later. It's not what you get now, and I'm probably even saying that wrong. Hey, everybody, God bless. This will be a good call, and if you need anything, you know to call my cell when you're done. Tom, it's all yours, buddy.
Great. Thanks, Frank. Sarah and I appreciate everything that you and the association are doing for the industry. This has been a long haul here through COVID and the different processes. We've been talking about Package 4 now for quite some time. The Congress and the President finally got together to get a package passed. So today will be, what we'll be talking about is just the overview, PPP program, small business provisions, tax incentives, direct economic relief, and like Frank said, at the end, we'll open up for Q&A. Like I said, Package 4 was a long time coming. There was a back and forth between the House and the Senate on how big Package 4 should be. Speaker Pelosi wanted about $2 trillion. Mitch McConnell wanted to hold it at about $900 billion. That's where we ended up. There was back and forth going on for months and months. We read about it in the paper, saw it on TV. The main hangups were that Speaker Pelosi wanted state and local funding to help them out, and Majority Leader McConnell wanted liability protections added in. So what they decided to do is take those two issues off the table and try to move forward on a package that could pass both the House and the Senate and be signed into law by the President. So that's where we're at today. We have the bill signed into law by the President, and now we're starting to move forward on the bill. Oh, how do I go back? There we go. So in the fourth package, we have an extension of the PPP. It's a new. It's based on the old. Remember months ago when we had this webinar, Sarah and I were talking about the PPP, and there was a slow roll from SBA on the rules, the regulations, how do you apply, getting banks online. There were just a ton of questions. So we've been through this once, and we're hoping that the SBA and the administration have clear guidance, a clear roadmap for everybody to go down. So the PPP is started on the 11th. We'll go through March 31st. The eligibility is businesses 300 or less employees. You can apply for a second round of PPP if you've utilized 100% of your first PPP. So that's one thing to look at and to consider. There is expanded eligibility for the PPP. 501c6 nonprofits are now eligible for that. It excludes publicly traded companies and businesses that otherwise are eligible for the PPP is not rendered ineligible due to its receipt of legal gaming revenues. Sarah?
Yeah, so as we look to beyond eligibility, one of the key questions that we've received is, well, what can you receive under the second PPP? Keep in mind, if you haven't applied for your first PPP, you can still apply for it. But for those that will be applying for the second PPP, the maximum loan size is the less of either a max of $2 million, or we're looking at two and a half times your average monthly payroll cost based on calendar years of 2019 or 2020. For those businesses that, so bowling comes under a NAICS code under Section 71. However, there may be some bowling proprietors that may also be able to qualify under a NAICS code of 72, depending on your business operations. And there's a lot of analysis that goes into that. Also to understand that companies can have more than one NAICS code. So those businesses that can come under a NAICS code of 72, which largely include restaurants, you may be eligible to receive a second draw of PPP at 3.5 times your average monthly payroll cost as well. So certainly work with your lender on that too, and be able to provide substantiation for why what your NAICS code is coming under 71 or Section 72. When determining a NAICS code, it's a North American industry classification system code, and it really is something that not a lot of companies have paid attention to because you haven't needed to. A NAICS code is provided on some of your tax documentation. It's also used for purposes, when you're doing some procurement stuff with the federal government or state governments that you would rely on NAICS codes. Well, SBA loan programs also are very dependent on NAICS codes, and that's why we're seeing them used a lot through these relief bills. So as I mentioned, a company can have more than one NAICS code. And when we look to SBA of how they really identify what your primary industry is that would align with your NAICS code, we want to look at several factors. One is your distribution of receipts. So for instance, perhaps if 50% of your receipts may come from both bowling and from food and beverage, you may have a case to also have an NAICS code under 72 as well. You want to look at your division of employees and your division of labor for how you use labor across your business operations. Consider what the cost of doing business are among the different industries that for your business operations too. And then also too, you may even consider what your assets are related to your business operations. So on the slide, you'll see that there's just some of the NAICS codes that we included that bowling proprietors would want to take a look at to understand what yours is, or perhaps what a couple of yours could be. So we see bowling centers right there under Section 71. We see other amusement and recreation industries also under Section 71. And then we see two full service restaurants and limited service restaurants under 72. If you find that you may have qualify under a Section 71 NAICS code, make sure that you provide substantiation as far as related to some of the factors that we spoke to before on receipts, employees, or cost of doing business, to be able to demonstrate to the lender and SBA why you would also come under a Section 72 or 71. Next slide. So in addition to looking at the maximum loan size on the eligibility requirements, let's take a look at some of the requirements that may remain the same under a second PPP loan, including that 60% requirement that has to be used for payroll costs. That remains the same. And that means that in order to have your loan forgiven, as well as just a mandate on how you use your loan proceeds, 60% of your loan proceeds must be used for payroll cost. In addition to affiliation rules still apply. That means, if a company has several companies, what that aggregate count would be for employees across the board. Set aside there for small businesses with 10 or fewer, there is a specific set aside for very small businesses. And so we want to take a look too as far as what that set aside looks like, especially for extremely small ones. And a lot of that goes down to, eligibility of working with your lender on that. And then loan forgiveness. Just as you went through loan forgiveness for your first PPP loan, loan forgiveness is also available for your second PP loan. and it's going to be under the same terms as conditions as that first round too, including some of what we'll highlight in just a few slides as far as the improvements to the loan forgiveness process as well. Tom, let me turn it over to you to just share a bit about some of the improvements that were made related to both first and second PPP loans.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so they have gone through to try to make improvements to the PPP. I think one of the largest one is the inclusion of insurance, whether it's vision, dental, disability, life, within the employee cost of the PPP. Also, if you returned part or all of the first round of PPP, you can reapply for the maximum amount. There were concerns on the first round of PPP with banks and the information that they were taking in on the PPP loans, and SBA's tried to give assurances that, you know, if the lender is acting in good faith and all the documentation is certifiable, that they're in good graces with SBA. Also, with bankruptcy, there's been some improvements on that. So if somebody goes into bankruptcy, there is a way to work with the PPP, but you need approval, I believe, from the administrator of the bankruptcy proceeding. So there are some improvements here, and like I started out with, the SBA is really trying to move forward and try to get it right this time. So some further improvements is flexible and waived terms under the 7A loans. So we have the guarantee of 100%, no collateral required, no personal guarantee. The interest rate is 1 percentage point or 100 basis points. The maturity rate of the PPP loan is 5 years. Certain fees will be waived, and the credit elsewhere test does not apply to the PPP. So SBA has really tried to work, streamline this, see where the pitfalls were on the first process, try to clarify some of the issues that they had and what we were going back and forth with many of you in the first tranche of the PPP in the early days of COVID. So Sarah, you want to continue loan forgiveness?
So when we're shifting from the loan forgiveness provision of it, so SBA, they actually started releasing information about the forgiveness process back last summer, but they didn't start approving applications until September of last year. So just an overview of the process itself and the time frame, because I know many of you are going through that right now, especially considering that some lenders were essentially putting on hold the forgiveness of your applications just as they anticipated some changes being made to it in this past relief bill. So the process itself, you want to work with your lender that you used for your PPP loan. And you're going to have to submit information as far as an application, as well as to some supporting documentation as well. So initially, borrowers with loans under $50,000, you had a simpler loan forgiveness. Under this fourth package of relief, that also includes a streamlined forgiveness for loans under $150,000. When we're talking about what documentation you're going to have to be submitting for loan forgiveness, particularly those that are outside of, the $150,000, you're going to have documentation on payrolls, you're going to have documentation on mortgages and interest and rent, leases, as well as to your utility payments. So essentially consider all those costs that are considered forgivable expenses. You're going to have to provide information related to those. So another question that we always get is, well, what is the time frame for this? How soon can we expect to have our loans forgiven? Some of it depends on the size of your loans. So a borrower, as soon as you have used all of your loan proceeds, you can submit for forgiveness. And you have the time frame for whenever you're done with your loan proceeds up to the time of the maturity of the date of the loan. So that might be either 2 or 5 years, depending on what you chose to do during the first cycle, to submit for forgiveness. However, you do want to apply as soon as possible, especially too within 10 months of the last day of your covered period. And the reason why is because after 10 months, you're going to have to start making loan payments. So let's move through as far as the forgiveness process before payments are required. The lenders have, once you submit documentation, your lender will have up to 60 days to review it and then submit it to SBA. And then in turn, SBA has to review it, approve of it, and issue the decision where they'll then, you're going to be receiving those refunds. And they have about 90 days. So by the books, it could be a 5-month process. But what we've seen and what SBA has demonstrated, that they are working to move as quickly through the process as possible. Just on Tuesday, they released a new statistic that they've approved 1.1 million loans as far as forgiving them as being concerned. That is up from where we were, about 367,000 of them being forgiven in November. So you can see throughout even the month of December and early January, they've really been moving through the process quickly as far as the forgiveness is concerned. If you received a loan over $2 million, your forgiveness process is going to be a little bit lengthier. And if you received a loan over $2 million, you likely also received what SBA released called a necessity questionnaire. This essentially is an audit process that SBA and Treasury are going through. If you remember, there has been a lot of scrutiny on who received PP loans. And in part of that was making sure that all those that receive PP loans receive them in good faith, that their certifications were accurate, and in turn that they were eligible for them. And so with that, a lot of borrowers that received the larger size loans, some of them had returned those proceeds. Others, others had kept them, but SBA is going to be reviewing then some of the information related to whether in fact some of these larger loans were necessary. So that's what these necessity questions are. Make sure that you submit those to SBA. They are required, and then that will help as you move through the forgiveness process to get your proceeds back, as well as far as forgiveness of the funding. Moving forward, as far as what changed under the fourth package on loan forgiveness, is there was several highlights related to what's included as forgivable expenses. So initially, we were talking about payroll cost, rent, mortgage, utilities, and additional expenses. The fourth round of relief included supplier expenses. It included if you had your centers any subject to property damage, given the disturbances that were happening throughout 2019, those costs would be included as forgivable expenses. Also, too, understanding that as many of your centers were looking to reopen, taking safety measures and purchasing PPE and other adaptive costs, those would be included in forgivable expenses as well. And then there's some technology operations that are included in there too. Then we look to some borrower flexibility of being able to, choose between 8 and 24 weeks. That if you received an EIDL, a disaster loan, as well as a PPP, one thing that you will have noticed is that the EIDL $10,000 advances, or if they were lower than that too, they would have to be subtracted out from the amount that you could be, from the amount of your PPP forgiveness. Well, now that's no longer the case. You can keep that in. You don't have to subtract out your EIDL advance. Also, too, as I mentioned before, there's simplification process for loans under $150,000. So now shifting to other SBA programs, Tom's going to provide some highlights related to the EIDL as well as to the 504 7A microloans. Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So the economic injury disaster loan, EIDL, the bill included $20 billion for the program, which will run through December 31, 2021. Like Sarah said, the there are improvements with the EIDL and how it's worked. Small businesses and nonprofits are eligible to receive that $10,000 grant, and then that doesn't apply off the PPP. So a lot of proprietors last time around had questions: do I go for the PPP? Do I go for the EIDL? And many just went for the EIDL to get that $10,000 grant off the top. So now going into the 7A, the 504, in the microloan. Oftentimes when purchasing a center, proprietors are looking at the different types of packages that SBA has, whether it's a 7A and the 504. Sarah and I have worked on other issues with SBA on these programs for proprietors, and along with Roger and the committee. The big difference now is that all borrowers qualifying for loans approved by SBA prior to the CARES Act will receive an additional 3 months of principal and interest starting February 2021. The payments are capped at $9,000. After the 3-month period, the bowling proprietors and other industries hardest hit, defined by the NAICS code, will receive an additional 5 months of principal and interest payments, also capped at $9,000. So if you do have current 7A or 504, that's a big win. So for the extension, they did include in there the bowling NAICS code of 71. So take a look at where you're at, where your loans are. If you have a 7A or a 504, this can help you quite a bit. So next is enhancements of SBA lending programs. In the bill, there's $2 billion of enhanced SBA core programs, including the 7A Community Advantage 504 microloan. There are temporary enhancements to the 7A loan program by increasing the loan guarantee to 90% and offering reduced or no fees to the borrower. Additionally, it would increase the 7A express loan limit in the loan guarantee. Temporarily eliminates for the 504 program in more favorable terms for refinancing, and increases the aggregate loan amount for microloan programs. So that can be taken advantage of and should be looked at. Okay, next we're going to go into tax incentives. Sarah?
Okay. So diving right in, a lot of changes have happened related to tax incentives that will be of interest to bowling proprietors to take advantage of. First is related to the Paycheck Protection Program that we just covered. One, it was clarified that forgiven PPP loans will not be included as taxable income. A big advantage there, as it shouldn't be. Also, two, related to deductions. As you may have recalled, the Department of Treasury in 2020 had initially said that it wasn't going to allow for deductions of forgivable expenses on your PPP loans. Well, Congress clarified this and essentially was in direct conflict or contrast to what Department of Treasury said. So keep in mind that now you are able to take deductions for expenses paid with the proceeds of your forgiven PPP loans. And so this is offered for both your first and your second PPP. Then looking at the extension of paid leave credits that there were in the Families First Act, there was provisions related to mandatory paid leave that small businesses would have to provide. And as an offset to that mandatory paid leave, what they provided was some paid leave tax credits. Well, that refundable payroll tax credit related to these paid sick and leave provisions has been extended through March 31st of this year. Also, too, there was incentives that were provided in the CARES Act related to essentially giving incentives. So before CARES, charitable contributions would only be able to be deducted if taxpayers itemize their deductions. Under CARES, you can take a charitable deduction of up to $300 for cash contributions made in 2020. Well, now that goes through 2021. If you provide those to qualifying organizations, so think religious organizations, charitable, educational, scientific, right? A lot of the nonprofits, essentially. So that incentive carries through 2021. Also, too, related to corporate contributing, that extends through the end of 2021, where there's increased limits on deductible charitable contributions for companies, in particular when we're looking at that deduction going from 10% of your taxable income to now 25% of your taxable income. And I know how involved the bowling industry is in charitable giving, so that's something to keep in mind for this. Now, one of the major highlights of the fourth bill, as Frank had shared at the very beginning, is related to the employee retention tax credit. There were a lot of changes that were made related to the employee tax credit. And initially, this tax credit was passed under the CARES Act, was encouraged to keep your employees on their payroll. Well, initially, if you took out PPP, you would not be eligible to also take advantage of this tax credit. That is changing. So let's look at a few of the changes here that were provided under the fourth bill of relief, because this is important for all of you that took out a first PPP loan in 2020, and then also too understanding that this tax credit has been extended for 6 months to go through the end of June. And what it allows you to do is that starting January 1, for changes going forward, the amount of the tax credit, which was 50%, is now increased to 75% as far as the credit rate itself. And that is for 70% of up to $10,000 per calendar quarter, which used to be $10,000 per year. So we see some major changes as far as the incentives that are provided for the next 2 quarters through July of this year. Based on the changes, the maximum tax credit available for the first half of 2021 is going to be $14,000 per employee, where before it was up to essentially $5,000 for the year. So again, and that's $5,000 per employee for the year. As far as whether you're eligible, we find that many bowling proprietors are going to be eligible for this tax credit, because the eligibility requirements are really coming down to the question of whether your operations were fully or partially suspended during any calendar quarter in 2020 due to your state shutting or your locality shutting your centers down. And we know for many states that includes the bowling proprietors. Or if you weren't shut down, then just looking at whether there's a decline in your gross receipts during a quarter of the year as well, too. So we find this will include the majority of the bowling industry in it. Other changes that we saw in it were changes to how they defined a large employer. Under the CARES Act, and this is important because what it comes down to is what eligible wages or what wages can be included, and what under the CARES Act, a company with more than 100 employees, you weren't able to receive credit for wages paid to an employee when they were actually performing services. You could only receive a credit for wages paid to an employee when they weren't performing services. So again, going back down to the intention of this whole credit for keeping employees on your payroll, even if you're essentially shut down. Well, under this fourth round of relief, as of January 1st, the threshold for that threshold for large businesses has been increased to 500 employees. So for the first 2 quarters of 2021, keep in mind that a company with 500 or fewer employees will be eligible for the credit even if the employees aren't working. So you can take the credit for all wages, whether your employee is working or whether they're not. And now when calculating the 500 employee threshold, just keep in mind too that if you have any affiliated companies, they would also be included in there too. As I mentioned, that those that received an initial PPP loan in 2020, you could also apply for the ERTC this is retroactive as far as the application of this is concerned. Big incentive there, big incentive for our industry. But also understand that in applying for the ERTC, you can't double dip, meaning that any employers that received your PPP loans that may be eligible to claim for ERTC, you can't claim for the same wages. You can only include those wages that weren't included under your PPP for the ERTC. Okay, so really big, several tax incentives for everyone to keep an eye on. Tom, let's take a look at the direct economic relief.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So additionally in the bill, besides the PPP, EIDL, and the other benefits, the bill included direct payments to individuals. It's a $600 payment. A family of 4 are receiving $2,400 in direct payments. So that's been a shot in the arm to many right now. The other program was with enhanced unemployment, and talked to many proprietors about that over the last many months regarding the federal kicker. Now the kicker's been reduced to $300 a week, but it's still a bump off the flat state rate. So people will still be getting a bump in unemployment insurance. Also, the extension of unemployment insurance, additional weeks of federally funded unemployment benefits to individuals who become unemployed due to the pandemic. So that kicks it from the 38 to 50 weeks, and also under the PEUC program, it extends it from 13 to 24 weeks. So again, things that are helping on the employee side of the program, and hopefully trying to smooth the waters for team members that are out there. So with that, going into Q&A time, Sarah and I will try to answer any questions. If you don't have questions now, but something arises as you're going through the process, please feel free to reach out to Sarah and I. We try to turn the answers around and get solutions as quick as we possibly can. We'll have all hands are on deck for this. So with that, open up to questions.
Yeah, so it looks like we received a few questions. I will start out with this one. This question is, do you have to have your first PPP forgiven in order to receive a second round of PPP?
Great question. Yeah, and there's a big distinction of actually using your proceeds versus having to have gone through the forgiveness process. Both in the statute and the information that SBA released, they speak to just the full use of your proceeds, not that you've already gone through the forgiveness process.
Got it. Thank you. And then for our next question, are the modifications to the employee retention tax credit retroactive?
Yeah, another great question. Thanks, Alex. So when we're talking about the employee retention tax credit, there's going to be provisions of it that are retroactive. For instance, the ability for you to apply for an ERTC, the tax credit if you took out a PPP, that portion of is retroactive as far as being able to go back and apply for it for 2020. However, some of the other modifications that we spoke about that were included in this last round of relief, for instance, talking about the increase in the tax rate from 50 to 70%, that is only effective starting this year through the end of June. Also, too, understanding that the change for the raises on the limit on per employee credible wages. So before it was $10,000 per year, now it's $10,000 per quarter. That only applies for the first half of 2021 as well too. And then the third highlight that I would say as far as what's not retroactive and only going forward is how we really are defined that threshold for large employer. So when I spoke to the differences of that, companies with that threshold of 500 or fewer can claim for all wages, whether your employees are performing services or not. That 500 threshold only applies for 2021. So there are some distinctions there as far as what's retroactive versus what's not.
Got it. Thank you. And another question here. Will there be more changes for loan forgiveness for the first round? Will any additional changes come out after Biden becomes president?
With that, we can't predict the future. Gazing into the crystal ball this past year has been really difficult. Potentially, there's conversations about a package 5. Speaker Pelosi again wants to get state and local funding in there. So what provisions they go at we're unsure of at this time. But that's one of the things that Sarah and I are closely looking at as soon as the Biden administration takes office and gets his people in place on, where does Speaker Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and the president want to go regarding these programs, and is there going to be changes in rules for forgivability on that? We don't have those answers yet.
Okay, and then thank you, Tom. And then another question for the employee retention tax credit. How do you determine if you are of large employer status?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure, Alex, I can take that one. So when you are trying to determine whether you're in large employer status, it really is coming down to looking at whether, as I mentioned, with the changes that were made, whether you how many full-time employees you have in 2019. So whether it's more than 500 or less than 500. And again, it's looking at the full-time employee threshold of 500. Part-time employees are not included in this count, and that's distinguished from some other evaluations, for instance, as under SBA when you were looking at all of your employees. But part-time employees are not included in that count, so that will help a lot of small businesses as far as being able to receive the added benefit for including all wages for your employees within this tax credit. And how you define then full-time employees is that you look at those that average at least 30 hours per week or 130 hours in a month.
Okay, great, thank you. And then let's see, another question here that we received from attendees is, if you didn't take the first PPP but took a tax credit, can you get 2 draws of PPP now? So maybe just a little clarification on that front.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So if the PPP, if you have not received your first PPP loan, you could take that out now. And understanding too that you what these changes that were in the most recent law, that you can take out, that you can receive both a tax credit, the employer tax retention credit, as well as to the PPP. Absolutely. However, understand that you can't double dip. So you won't be eligible, for instance, for some of the same wages under both. It's only going to cover those that weren't covered previously.
Okay, thank you. And then for a final question here, we got a question from the attendees. It says, how many employees should I put on my application? Is it the number of employees from 2019, which is the period I'm using to assess payroll costs, or is it my current employee count?
Do you have, Alex, do you have clarification? What is that in regards to the PPP or the tax credit? Do we know?
I'm not sure. It might be from, maybe let's cover PPP.
So, and work with your lender on this, but a lot of the calculations related to what you're eligible for loan proceeds and overall, I know a lot of the headcount goes back to evaluating, your average over the prior, 12 months or in 2019. So you have that option to really identify what your average employee count was over that period of time, that would correspond with what your other calculations are on that PPP. And for the ERTC, we'll just cover both. The ERTC, our understanding, it really is based off of the employee count in 2019.
Any other questions,
Okay,
Alex?
great. Thank you, sir. I think that covers it for the questions, and we'll be sure to reach back out if we received any here prior to the end of the presentation.
Great. This is Tom. Sarah and I and Alex appreciate everybody taking the time to dial in. We know that everybody's busy in these crazy times. If you do have any questions that we didn't cover today, please feel free to reach out to us or just go through Bpaa, and they will forward all the questions on to us. And like I said earlier, we'll be sure to get back to everybody on a timely basis. So again, on behalf of Sarah, Alex, and myself, and Frank, and Roger Nyquist, and the whole Bpaa staff, thanks everybody for dialing in today. We really appreciate it. Stay safe and stay healthy.